Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first edition of the Where in the World series of sort of semi-podcasts here on GoWesteros on Spreaker. My name is Jack, I am your host and your travel guide to all of these beautiful locations and to all of these magnificent characters. So what are these podcasts about? Well, my objective here is to help the casual fan of A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones to keep up to date with the multitude of noble houses and how they relate to the overall story as it's being told. In each episode, I will be randomly selecting 3 minor noble houses from 3 randomly selected regions of Westeros, and we'll be giving you a rundown on their recent history as it pertains to the story. So that means none of the great houses, no Starks, no Lannisters, no Greyjoys, no Tyrells, none of them. What this means is some of the information of these houses will be very little, some will be quite lengthy, and some will be somewhere in between. In this inaugural episode, I will be looking at houses Glover from the north, Rowan from the Reach, and Emmon from the Crown Lands. So let's get into it, first with House Glover. What do we know of House Glover? Here are some facts according to the Song of Ice and Fire Wikipedia. Their seat is Deepwood Motte. Their sigil, a grey gauntlet on a red shield, and they are one of the principal sworn houses to the Starks of Winterfell. They also have several lesser houses situated in the Wolfswood that are sworn to them, including houses Bowl, Branch, Woods, and Forrester. The Glovers are considered a masterly house. A masterly house is the northern equivalent of a knightly house. They lord over their own lands, they have their own lands. However, they cannot dispense justice by their own admission. They have to get a verdict from their own overlords. In this case, it would be House Stark, and then I guess later on in the series, it would be House Bolton. It's here that I must say that, yes, this is spoilers for all 5 books of A Song of Ice and Fire, from A Game of Thrones right through to A Dance with Dragons, so just bear that in mind. In history, the Glovers were first men kings in the aftermath of the Long Night. That says to me that they've always been a powerful northern family. However, they were eventually reduced to vassals by the Kings of Winter, the Starks, and since then have presumably been some of their closest allies. Some famous Glovers in history include Jorah Mormont's first wife. Unfortunately, she died after her 3rd miscarriage. Ethan Glover was Brandon Stark's squire during Robert's rebellion. He went with Brandon Stark to King's Landing and was the only one to survive that whole ordeal. I'm sure you all know what that is. You can check out other podcasts. I won't dive into that. He later died at the Tower of Joy, fighting alongside Brandon's younger brother Eddard. Other Glover women in history have been married to Stark lords in the past, so forever tying one family to the other. And since then, I guess all Stark descendants have had Glover blood in them. When we come to the events of A Song of Ice and Fire, House Glover were an integral part of the Starks' campaign. They, alongside the Tall Hearts, fortified Moat Cailin under Lord Eddard Stark's behest, and then made haste to Winterfell when the young Wolf Robb Stark rallies his banners. The Lord of Deepwood Motte at this time is Galbert Glover, who is on Robb Stark's war council with his brother Robert. Deepwood Motte is left in the hands of Robert's wife Sybil. Throughout all of A Game of Thrones, the Glover men are marching south behind the banners of the Direwolf. The brothers split when the northern host reaches the Twins. Galbert stays with Robb, whilst Robert is assigned to the army commanded by Lord Roose Bolton. Following this, both Glover brothers fight in separate battles. Robert fights in the Battle of the Green Fork. They are defeated, but he does survive. He fights alongside notable names such as Ronald Stout, Sir Kyle Condon, Sir Ennis, and Elmar Frey, and they all manage to escape. Meanwhile, Galbert fights in both the Battle of the Whispering Wood, where Jaime Lannister is captured, as well as the Battle of the Camps, where the northern host relieves Riverrun of its siege. We can assume, due to these battles in which both brothers survived, that they're either skilled fighters or commanders or both. You know, they are Northmen, they are tough and gruff. We aren't ever given specifics about these two in these battles, but, you know, they must have fought well, or must have commanded well. During a clash of kings, Galbert is present at the Battle of Oxcross, which he survives again, and continues to raid along the coast of the Sunset Sea in the west. Excuse me, I am a bit ill, so you'll have to excuse that, I'm afraid. Robert, however, has a bit more of a rocky journey. Robert and Ennis Frey are taken into Harrenhal under the guise of captives of Vargo Hoat, the commander of the brave companions, whom they have struck a deal with. They use this ruse to overpower the small force left behind to defend the giant fortress under command of Sir Ambrose Lork, I pronounce it Lork, it's probably wrong. It's fun to note that this confusion prompts Arya Stark, who is sort of in secret there as a sort of servant, slave girl, whatever, to successfully liberate captives with the help of Jaqen Hagar, Biter and Rorge. Robert congratulates Jaqen on burning the defenceless guard with hot soup and questions them, stating that they're not Vargo Hoat's men whom he cheated with in the Bolton camp. Readers here are probably screaming at the page, yelling at Arya to present herself so that Robert can take her home and back to her family. But of course, she introduces herself as Weasel, and Robert doesn't really care. I mean, why would you? When Roose Bolton takes up Harrenhal as his seat, Arya is still there, and she's still contemplating on whether she can trust Robert with her secret identity. She doesn't end up coming to the conclusion that she can trust him. Up in Deepwood Motte, the Glovers play a part in the succession of the Hornwood lands, as Lawrence Snow, the bastard of Lord Hallis Hornwood, is fostered there at Deepwood Motte. When Bran Stark calls for the harvest feast, the young prince realises that the steward of House Glover is the one making all the decisions rather than Lady Glover herself, because she no-shows the event, she's not there. It is noted, just a little bit of a side information here, that Glover men play bladder and woodharp during the feast. Following Harrenhal, Robert is part of the force that marches on the town of Duskendale with Sir Helman Tallheart. Robert is captured at the Battle of Duskendale. Lord Randall Tarley traps him against Blackwater Bay, and when he tries to flee up the King's Road, he is stopped by Sir Gregor Clegane, otherwise known as the Mountain That Rides. There are heavy casualties on both sides. As this is happening, the Ironborn are invading the north, whilst its main host is marched south. Asha Greyjoy, the daughter of Baelor Greyjoy, takes the wooden keep of Deepwood Motte and holds Lady Sybil and her children hostage. Edmund Tully is to be married to a Frey girl at the Twins. Galbert Glover is given Sir Brynden Tully's, his uncle, his place as commander of the Scouts and Outriders. Lady Catelyn remarks Galbert as a good man, loyal and steady, and I kind of assume that the Glovers have always been as such. The Starks don't get any accounts of rebellions, so yeah, that's how I make my assumption. Galbert Glover is present at the signing of Robb Stark's will. The young wolf sends Galbert and Lady Mage Mormont on Mallister longships through the marshes of the Neck to seek out the ever-elusive Lord Howland Reed, one of Ned Stark's dearest friends, and the only other survivor of the Tower of Joy. The contents of that will... sorry about that. The contents of that will is the subject of another podcast entirely. There are dozens of theories and explanations elsewhere on the internet. I suggest go checking out those. And that is the last we hear of Galbert Glover until, hopefully, Winds of Winter. In the meantime, Tywin Lannister agrees to Robb Stark's terms of trading Robert Glover for his nephew Martin Lannister. Robert is put on a boat bound north. During the events of the Feast of the Crows, Asha Greyjoy brings Sybil Glover and her children, Garwin and the infant Arena, to 10 towers on Harlaw in the Iron Islands. It is noted that Usher treats them well and has them quartered in one of the castle's towers rather than the dungeons. After their visit to the Iron Islands, Usher takes Lady Sybil back to her home. However, she leaves the children at 10 Towers as leverage, so Sybil doesn't try anything stupid. Sybil spends her days praying for her children and her husband Robert's safe return. And at this time, Robert is still making his way north. Eventually, Stannis Baratheon retakes Deepwood Motte and Sybil is freed. As gratification, she sends many Glover men with King Stannis to march on Winterfell, and she also ends up ransoming her 7 Ironborn prisoners to Tycho Nestoris, an envoy of the Iron Bank of Bravos who is seeking Stannis and needs a guard as he traverses the northern terrain. Robert Glover arrives in White Harbour, the only city in the north. He initially tries to raise men to take Deepwood Motte from the Ironborn, whom I believe at this time still hold the keep, but he has little success, and his appeals to Lord Wyman Manderley fall short. Robert remains in White Harbour, and when Davos Seaworth arrives, the three discuss the possibility of the city aligning itself with Stannis. He learns that Stannis has taken Deepwood Motte from the Ironborn and gives his gratitude to Lord Davos to pass on to his king. It is revealed that Robert has been teaching Wex Pike to read and write. Wex was Theon Greyjoy's squire and has information on the whereabouts of Bran and Rickon Stark. He declares that when Davos returns from the island of Skargos with young Rickon, he will accompany him, and unbeknownst to him, Lady Sybil has already declared House Glover to Stannis Baratheon. So he was going to go with Davos to Deepwood Motte, or wherever he is else in the north. And this is all we know of House Glover so far in A Song of Ice and Fire. We've seen him in battle, in war councils and strife, and have even got an in-depth look at the lady, or the ladies of the house anyway. That's something we don't see very often. Sybil Glover plays a good part in having Usher Greyjoy deal with another woman and children, rather than gruff soldiers and men. That's a bit of a different sort of environment, I suppose, that Usher is used to. She relates to Sybil, and it does reflect in her character. The Glovers are one of my favourite lesser houses in this series, and I really do look forward to reading about them both, Galbert and Robert, in the Winds of Winter. And now we move south to the Reach. House Rowan of the Reach are one of the most prominent and oldest families in the realm. Its dominions extending all along the Reach's northern borders. This means that the Rowans are the marshals of the North March, and they replaced the declining House Osgrey, who are now their bannermen. Their seat is Golden Grove, and their sigil is a golden tree upon a white field. Their words are not known as of yet. Much like several other major Reach houses, the Rowans can trace their descent from Garth Greenhand, the legendary figure of the First Men. Rowan Goldtree was one of Garth's legendary daughters, and according to this legend, she was so bereft when her lover left her for a rich rival that she wrapped an apple in her golden hair and planted it atop a hill. They have two houses that serve fealty to them, being House Osgrey and House Webber, and they may have more, but they're the only ones we know. And both the houses play a part in the tales of Dunk and Egg, and both of which they have married into in the past. In history, House Rowan declared for the Blacks during the Targaryen Civil War, known as the Dance of the Dragons. There are 3 named members of House Rowan in the series so far: Lord Mathis, his wife Lady Bethany of House Redwine, who we will be covering in a future episode, and an unspecified relation called Rhonda Rowan, who is married to Sir Baelor Hightower, the heir of Hightower in Oldtown. In the events that take place during A Song of Ice and Fire, our first taste of any Rowan comes when the Night's Watch new recruit Darian claims that Lord Mathis Rowan's daughter invited him into her bed. However, Lord Mathis named it rape, and sent him off to the war. And already we get the sense of Lord Mathis' power within this world, and it's established that House Rowan is powerful enough at least to convict a man and give him a life sentence at the Night's Watch. We also learn the Lord's name and that he has at least one child, and we know that Lord Mathis will not suffer his daughter to bed even the best of singers, as we come to find out. Much like the majority of other Lords of the Reach, Lord Mathis declares for King Renly in the wake of the War of the Five Kings. He marches to Bitterbridge under the Crowned Stag and is present at the great melee, however you want to say that, great melee that Renly holds to appoint a new member of his Rainbow Guard. This, of course, is won by Brienne of Tarth. It isn't mentioned if any men of House Rowan fights in the melee, but it's likely they could have done. Following the tournament, or the tourney, Lord Mathis is present when Lady Catelyn Stark meets King Renly, who has come as an envoy for her own son, Robb Stark. Mathis expresses his distress when he learns that Jaime Lannister was not executed following his capture. He later sits beside Catelyn at a feast and remarks to her how young the knights surrounding King Renly are. When she says she pities them, he cannot understand why, and notes that they are all young, strong, and lustful. She of course answers with, "They are the nights of summer, and winter is coming." And I'm sure that must have given Lord Mathis some chills. Lord Mathis is also present at the parley with Stannis Baratheon under the walls of Storm's End, and afterwards he advises Renly to leave his older brother to besiege Storm's End and go on to take the capital city of King's Landing. His advice is overruled, and instead Renly places him in command of the centre force in the coming battle. Shortly before the dawn of the coming battle, Lord Mathis, Lord Randall Tarley, and King Renly are making the final preparations. Mathis suggests to attack before dawn, but again is overruled because Renly chooses to honour his agreement to begin the battle at their selected and agreed time. Renly doesn't seem to listen to Mathis much. As much is clear, Lord Mathis remarks that Stannis would sooner die than surrender, and after receiving their final orders, they leave Renly to ready their own soldiers. Of course, later that night, Renly is assassinated by the Shadow, and that battle never takes place. To close out House Rowan's involvement during a Clash of Kings, Lord Mathis is among the lords who, like the Tyrells, do not flip over to Stannis Baratheon's side. He is one of the prime leaders of the Reach that joins Lord Tywin Lannister at the headwaters of the Blackwater Rush. They march alongside the Lannister host until Tumblers Falls, where Lord Mace Tyrell awaits them with an even larger force. They embark on boats and sail to just outside the capital, where they take Stannis' army from behind during the Battle of the Blackwater, and following the battle, Lord Mathis is among those presented to King Joffrey, and Tywin Lannister even grants him an advisory seat on the prestigious small council. In A Storm of Swords, Lord Mathis is a guest at the royal wedding and presents the king with a red silk tawny pavilion as a wedding gift. Good Joffrey is, of course, getting married to Lady Marjorie of House Tyrell. In A Feast for Crows, after the death of the Hand of the King, the Lord Tywin Lannister, his brother Sir Kevan Lannister mentioned Lord Mathis as a possibility to fill the vacant position. Instead, Queen Cersei chooses Sir Harys Swift and removes Lord Mathis from the small council altogether. Following his demotion, Lord Mathis rides with Lord Mace Tyrell to besiege Storm's End, which is being held by Stannis' man, Gilbert Faring. When Lord Mace hears that his daughter, the Queen Marjorie, has been arrested by the High Septon, he returns to the capital and leaves the Lord of Golden Grove in command of the siege. Elsewhere in the world, in the mind of Sir Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, he remarks that Lord Mathis would make an able hand of the king, so maybe Queen Cersei should have taken Sir Kevan's suggestion. We see nothing of House Rowan in A Dance with Dragons. The Golden Company land in the Stormlands and quickly seize several castles to gain a beachhead for Aegon VI. or Fagon, or young Griff, however you want to, whichever one you believe there, it is made known that their next target is Storm's End, in which we know Lord Mathis Rowan is now holding with a token force. So we can expect that to come up in the Winds of Winter, and hopefully we shall. Well, yeah, we should be seeing more of House Rowan in the future. And now on to our final house of the episode. Now remember, I picked these 3 houses at random. In fact, using a random name generator on the internet, and that comes with the possibility of them having little or nothing to do with the events of the series. House Emmon is among those who have had, that we know of, little to do with the story so far. So what do we know of House Emmon? Their sigil is a blue swordfish on a white patterned field, one of my favourite sigils, might I add. Their seat is Shut Point, which is a stone castle located along the gullet at the northern end of Massey's Hook, which of course is in the Crown Lands. It is known that the castle has a large watchtower in which a great fire burns on top of it, a fantasy lighthouse, if you will. The current lord is Durham Emmon, who, according to the Song of Ice and Fire wiki page, is a plump 14-year-old boy who wears purple velvet trimmed with a white seal. So a young lord, and according to Roose Bolton, a young lord is the bane of any house. When we come to a Song of Ice and Fire, we see or hear nothing of House Emmon in the first book, A Game of Thrones. They are first introduced in A Clash of Kings, when the young Lord Durham supports Stannis Baratheon's claim on the Iron Throne. He pledges himself to be one of Stannis' vassals. House Emmon's contribution to Stannis' fleet is the ship Swordfish, aptly named, of course. And on the flip side, Stannis complains that his lords sworn to him, including the Emmons, are a poor crop. So perhaps the Emmons do not have a vast or strong force. The age of Lord Durham might also lend itself to this, because he can't have much, if any, experience in war. I'd say that he doesn't have any, as he would have been a baby during Robert's Rebellion, or a young child. A bit later on, in A Clash of Kings, Davos Seaworth sees Lord Durham turning a splotchy grey when Melisandre burns the Sept of Dragonstone. Well, I should say, I skipped over this a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the history of House Emmon, because there's not a lot of them in this story. So let's talk a bit about the history, just to give you a bit of a feel where they came from. The house was founded during the Anlal invasion of Westeros by a warlord named Togarian the Terrible. Togarian established his own kingdom north of Blackwater Bay. Sensing weakness to the south, Togarian took the daughter of King Joshua Massey of Stonedance and set up his new kingdom on Massey's Hook. That is where Sharp Point was built, right on the tip of the hook's end, and using that he drove the Stormlanders of House Massey away from Stonedance and installed his wife's brother as a puppet king, a cunning and powerful man for sure, and maybe his alias of the Terrible isn't so unwanted. Just prior to the War of Conquest, the Emmons were sworn to House Durrandon of Storm's End. They were the Storm Kings. However, they had closer ties to the Targaryens of Dragonstone, which says to me that they may have wed into one another's families after the Dragon Lords landed on Dragonstone. I do not believe that is confirmed, though. However, the Emmons did choose to support Aegon the Conqueror rather than their own Durrandon Storm Kings. So who knows? So we go back to Storm of Swords, the series, and the Emmon banners are seen in Castle Black after Stannis' arrival. And that, just then, ends House Emmon's involvement so far in the Song of Ice and Fire. The Emmon banners are seen at the wall says to me that they have remained sworn to Stannis, even after the shattering defeat at the Blackwater, showing some loyalty. We know little of Lord Durran's involvement in the Battle of Blackwater Bay. According to the wiki, the Swordfish was part of the fleet commanded by Sir Imry Florent, and its captain was considered incapable. Could this have been Lord Durham himself? Was he incapable due to his young age and low experience? That seems likely. The captain, assuming it's Lord Durham, had left the ship's sails up and was hit by pitch. However, she kept sailing until she rammed a hulk filled with wildfire. So yeah, not a very good naval commander. Naval captain. The ship was almost destroyed instantly. Did Lord Durham survive the battle? It's never explicitly stated. It's very likely that he went down with his warship. But due to the Emmon banners being seen at the wall, it's also possible that he survived and is still commanding his own men. But, his banners being there could also just be other unnamed members of the house, or still soldiers sworn to Stannis. Could we be seeing House Emmon again in the future? Possibly. They haven't played any integral parts to the story, and I've only seen and been mentioned sporadically. So, it wouldn't surprise me if they remained at that level. So yeah, that concludes the first look at 3 random lesser houses in Westeros. We've gone over their events as they pertain to the story and the characters that are involved. I hope you have enjoyed the episode and like the idea that I'm trying to convey. I guess this is my first ever podcast / sort of, not really video, but yeah, sort of semi-podcast. So if the format doesn't quite work as well as I thought, feel free to suggest ways to improve. I'd like criticism, advice. I'd love that stuff. That would be great. Again, I've been your host. I'm Jack. Thank you very much, and good